Hi guys, so today's video is going to be about women before the 19th Amendment and then the women of the temperance movement a little bit. Make sure you're filling out your study guide as you go. If you're looking for answers to previous questions on the study guide, that will probably be in the women of the suffrage movement video, so go check that one out. So starting off, what is a social norm? A social norm is an accepted behavior that an individual is expected to conform to in a particular group, community, or culture. So we as an American society have different social norms that you may not even realize that you're following. I have an example here in this comic strip. It says, what's the difference between being assertive and being aggressive? And the other person says, your gender. That's because when men are challenging ideas or other people, they're known as being assertive, especially when like something's wrong and they're trying to correct it. Most people would categorize them as like, oh, they're being so assertive, you know, they're getting what they want, they're fighting for what they want. And then when a woman does it, primarily people are like, oh, why is she so aggressive? She's so aggressive and mean and terrible. Okay. So that is like an example of a social norm that society follows with men versus women. So some other types of social norms. We have folkwe, a norm that stems from and organizes casual interactions. Taboo, this is a strong negative norm. Basically, when you violate, it results in like extreme disgust or shame. More a norm that structures around the difference between right and wrong. So that's why the angel and the devil are there. And then law, a norm that is formally inscribed at the state or federal level. So even some of our laws are influenced or are social norms in general. So the women's suffrage movement kind of marked the changing in some of these social norms, especially for the time. Women before the 19th Amendment, they were gaining some freedom. They were actually able to own property, control their earnings from their job to a certain degree through different work unions, and they could make contracts and wills. So if you don't know what a will is, that's basically when you pass away, your will say not what part, but like how much of your belongings will go to a certain person, or how much of your money will be donated here or given to this person, or shared, if you have kids, shared among a bunch of different people. So why is it important that women are finally able to be given the right to write a will? That means they actually have assets to be able to give out after their death, right? So before this, women weren't really working or making money for themselves, but now they're able to own wills. So that kind of opens up a new door of possibilities of earning money and actually leaving the money to who they want after they die, rather than it just going to the next like male relative. Women in the workplace. So 5 million women work for wages in the early 1900s. They worked in other ways, but they're now receiving actual pay. We'll see how that differs, especially the divide between men and women between 1920 and this is from 2012. I know that seems probably a long time ago to you, but it's not that long ago. It's interesting to see how that's only growing, right? So women in the workplace is definitely grown since 1920. Here I just have the different jobs that women were employed as in 1920. So number one is domestic and personal service. You'll notice stenographers and typewriters. Stenographer is like somebody that's in the courtroom, basically like a secretary for the courtroom that's like taking notes on a stenograph, I think it's called. You should look that up. It's a very interesting machine. I can never operate one, but you have to learn how to operate it. Farm laborers, bookkeepers and cashiers, cooks, farmers in general, farms. And then we have in 2019, teachers, go teachers, are the top. The nurses, secretaries, cashiers, waiters and waitresses. So it's just interesting how like teachers is at the top, but we have these definitely new or newer jobs being offered. And also the numbers are up. If we look here, not many, okay, as opposed to here, which is almost maxing out the chart there. So women have often worked, right? But they haven't necessarily been paid for it. One of which is they're still kind of enduring, which is stay-at-home moms. If you have a stay-at-home mom, you should realize how much she does for you, because she does a lot and for not any pay, but your sometimes love, right? So they're oftentimes, even back in 1920, unpaid laborers behind the scenes, working at home, taking care of the kids, the house, everything about that. So the big question people begin to ask, should women have the right to vote, own property, have an income, access to education, and professional jobs? Some people argue that this would upset the social order, because at this time women are seen as, one, inferior, but also that their place is in the home, not out working in the working world, right? And it said they would often, or this would also rob women of their femininity, which isn't true, right? Just because a woman has a job doesn't make her any less of a woman, right? And many saw women as not having the full mental capacity to handle higher education or profession. So that's another way they're blocking women from kind of rising up, is that, no, you're not smart enough. Your brain wouldn't be able to handle it, stuff like that. So you're probably like, oh, what about the 15th Amendment? Oh, what about the 15th Amendment, Miss Grady? Didn't that give people the right to vote, or did it give women the right to vote and it was just taken away? Women were excluded from that. It was the right to vote for all men, regardless of race. Women were still not included in that. And the right to vote wasn't always restricted in some states, though. In 1918, a number of states started allowing women to vote on in their elections. It was mostly on the West Coast. I'll show you a map in a minute, but also in Illinois and Indiana. Many of the opposition came from Southern Democrats. Big surprise there. We've seen a lot of oppositions on other issues. They said, this sounds familiar, I bet, it was the state's right to exclude women to vote. This is the same argument that they made with slavery and segregation. Both of those things, slavery and segregation, are not good things, to put it lightly, right? And barring women from the right to vote is also not a good thing. So it seems like that argument is only used when it is only benefiting one side and excluding or mistreating another side. So here's a map. I think this map is super interesting because we see in the key here, full suffrage was given in mostly Western states. And we'll talk about why that is, why they wanted women to move out here in the West in a second. But Illinois did have presidential and municipal suffrage, but we see mostly full suffrage being out here in the West, and New York and Michigan. That's awesome. So what do you think the states out West allowed women to vote first? Why do you think? Sorry. They're trying to get people to move out West, specifically women, because they want to, quote, populate the West. So there's still this idea that, oh, all women are good for is making babies, right? But they're giving women those rights to try and like lure them out into the West, which is kind of, I don't know what to think about that. It's an interesting ploy to be like, come out West and populate the West and you can vote. Okay. I don't know, but I don't know. So some other countries that were given women the right to vote before the United States. We have New Zealand in 1893. And all the way up to Saudi Arabia just gave women the right to vote in 2011. So other countries were given giving women the right to vote before the United States, some closer to when we gave the right to vote, but some were not even given the right to vote until, 2011, which is crazy. Seneca Falls Convention. This is like the first big meeting of all these women getting together and talking about, trying to gain that right to vote and a plan of action to kind of put that in place. It's like the first public gathering. Women are giving speeches. They're voting on different policies. It's just kind of this first meeting of women. The Declaration of Sentiments is something that they put out. You'll notice that it sounds almost like another document. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Okay. So they are basing it off of the foundation documents of our country for a reason, right? But changing one word in particular to try and convince people like, hey, just this one word would help women, across the country. It's just, it's interesting to put this out. And then they all signed it at the Seneca Falls Convention. Oh, I really wanted to, okay. Also, you'll notice that we have ladies signing it, right? And then we also have gentlemen. So we had male allies as well on the side of women's suffrage, which I think is pretty cool. So I did want to shout them out. Susan B. Anthony was almost able to get a sponsored amendment to be discussed on the Senate floor, but it was unfortunately defeated. So close. Here we have the temperance movement. We'll talk more about this in the 1920s. But basically the prohibition was outlawing alcohol. And the reason they were doing this, and once again, we'll talk about this more, but they were fighting for wage rights, making wills, owning property, and the right to vote. And it started at this basic level organization, but they were cutting people off from alcohol because at the time, if you think about the women being at home and the men going out in the world and working and then coming home, oftentimes alcohol would play a huge factor in the home life of some of these women. They would be abused in different ways because their husbands were coming home drunk. So this was the way that they thought would be the most effective way, and it was to try and protest and kind of gain their rights. The movement was founded in 1874, and by 1890 it had 150,000 members. It was a huge group. So it has like this guy, it says vote wet for my sake. So like alcohol, pro alcohol, or dry for mine. It has the mom, concerned mother, home with her kids. Okay. Shall the mothers and children be sacrificed to the financial greed of liquor traffic? That's another thing. If men are the sole breadwinners of the family, right? The mother is not working, then if the men in that situation are spending all their money on alcohol, that's also cutting into what they're able to provide for their family. So that's another reason why. We have protesting happening across the United States, specifically in Washington, D.C. I think we see a lot of photos of women standing with their signs like this, but we don't see a lot of photos of women actually getting arrested or put down by the police. And that's what I have over in this photo too. Alice Paul, you'll notice that she is on the sign, her name says Alice Paul got 7 months because she opposed a political party. We demand that she be treated as a political offender. She was not the only one that was arrested, but I did talk about her in the last video. She was actually put in solitary confinement to break her will. And she was actually force-fed, which is crazy. And this mistreatment of a lot of these women gave people more of a reason to support them. They were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. They need our support. And it got more people out. And there's Alice Paul standing next to a ballot box. So Minor versus Happersett was basically a court case that a woman brought to court and arguing that the 15th Amendment gave women the national right to vote. But the court decides that it only applied to African-American men, and they decide that the states will still have the right to prevent women from voting. So still up to the states. NAWSA is the National American Women's Suffrage Association. It's made up of middle to upper class women. These women were using nativist ideas to promote suffrage. They would argue, if we can give these, quote, ignorant immigrants the right to vote, then we should be able to vote. Who is we in this situation? White women, okay, non-persons of color, okay? It's important to note that people of color did not gain the right to vote at the same time as the 19th Amendment. Okay, it took some up to 25 years to gain the right to vote. It's important to realize that this whole women's movement was not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There was still a divide. President Wilson and the suffrage movement. President Wilson didn't really have an opinion on women's suffrage until they started putting like anti-war slogans on their posters and their picketing signs. They did not support World War I. And so he was, pretty mad about that. And we have those pictures on the side. It says Wilson is against women, vote against Wilson. He opposes national suffrage. But eventually he's so appalled by like Alice Paul, the hunger strikes, and he fears negative publicity. Excuse me. And he agrees to women's suffrage in January of 1918. So, I mean, in a roundabout way, we get it. We get women's suffrage, but I feel like it should have been because he believed in it, not because he was afraid of negative publicity, but I mean, we'll take it. Technology for the home. These were machines that were geared towards women because majority of them were still at home, and they would often protest certain products based on how they were made. That was another way how women in the home were kind of rising up and protesting on their own. But what gets them out of the home is these two pieces of technology. One is the typewriter, which helps provide secretary jobs, and another is the telephone. And you may not know this, but back in the day when you picked up like a telephone, you would have to speak to a person and ask them to dial a certain number or a business, or if you're calling your friend, and those people were called operators. So that was also a job with the telephone. So women are finally getting a life outside the home. So how does this idea of birth control fit into the 19th Amendment? We see women start to ask for birth control during this time because women are making more money. They want to wait to have kids or have less kids so they can make money on their own. Or they just don't want to have kids, period. So introducing the workplace also introduces this idea of birth control. This like radical idea of women enjoying themselves in a way that men had been able to do for years is also why birth control is kind of introduced at this point. Some advocates were thrown in prison or even deported for speaking about women's sexual freedom. So it's hypocritical for men to say, okay, well, I can go out and have fun, right, for sexual freedom, but women were forced to not and stay in the house and be ignorant. One woman was actually put in prison for opening a clinic that gave out birth control to women. So that's how controversial this was. Okay, amendment review. This is also on your study guide. Some of these are from last semester, but we have the 13th Amendment, freeing the slaves, the 14th Amendment. If you're born in the United States, you are a citizen and given all rights. 15th Amendment gave men, regardless of race, the right to vote. 16th Amendment gave the federal income tax. 17th Amendment, you can vote for senators. 18th Amendment instituted the prohibition, no alcohol. And the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. So these are on your study guide. You should have at least your study guide filled out for this portion. I have a booklet on this Google Classroom post. I also have the study guide linked if you lost it. So make sure you're looking at those and studying for your test.